everybody, welcome back to Great Northwest Weaponry. This is Thomas, and today we're looking at another weird one that I've wanted for quite a while and finally got my hands on, the Saint-Étienne MLE 1892 French Ordinance Revolver. This is a cool one. This is actually the second oldest pistol in my collection at this time, being dated 1901. And again, it's one that I've really wanted for a while. I had one from the 20s once upon a time. I believe it was dated 1924. This was like 4 or 5 years ago now that I had that, actually. But I really wanted one that was either World War I or pre-World War I, especially as the French kept their guns in service for a long time, typically. A lot of interesting functions, a lot of interesting history behind this thing. And before we get too far into that here, let's go ahead and pop into the gun room. The Modèle 1892, or MLE 1892, French Ordinance Revolver has a pretty straightforward history as far as a lot of the guns that we've covered, though still maintains being one that in the West is a little less known. It was simply meant as a replacement for the Model 1873. It was developed, of course, in 1892, adopted in 1893 by the Saint-Étienne factory in France. And it was both developed and produced there by my understanding, and these do have a nickname, the Lebel Revolver. You will see this nickname pretty commonly, and is actually, if you're going to do research on them, is going to be easier to find it by looking up Lebel Revolver. Though this name is not just somewhat inaccurate, as much as more or less just outright false. Didn't get it set up very well there. There we go. But anyway, so Lebel Revolver as a nickname. To what I can find and everything that I've read, Colonel Nicholas Lebel had nothing to do with the design of either this revolver or the cartridge that was developed for the 8mm French Ordnance, of which you will see labeled as 8mm Lebel sometimes, and the only connection to Colonel Lebel that I can find is the fact that it's smokeless powder, and he developed the helped develop the 8mm rimmed Lebel rifle cartridge. That is another small part of the story here. These were originally chambered in a similar 8mm caliber, but it would have been a black powder cartridge. Basically, by the time they switched over their rifles to smokeless powder, they switched over the revolvers as well, and this being a smaller bullet and a very heavily built revolver for its caliber, of which is comparable to 32 ACP, by the way, it was able to handle the upgrade to smokeless powder without really needing any major modifications from what I can find. These would be the primary officer's service revolver in the First World War, for the French, of course, and they were the primary users of this, the French. They, from what I can find, they weren't really widespread up to World War I. It was pretty much confined to France. Some 350,000 of them were made from 1892 up to 1924, of which I think I'd already mentioned that the previous one of these that I'd owned, I believe, is dated 1924. Keep on saying dates and it starts all sounding the same in my head, so my apologies there. But 1924, I believe, was the date on my previous one. As we'd already established, this is a 1901, so a fairly early one, though should be after the adoption of smokeless powder. They were built specifically for it, but from my understanding, they pretty much just used smokeless powder cartridges in the older ones as well, as they were strong enough to handle it. Another little interesting trivia fact, in the movie Flyboys, a World War I Lafayette Escadrille-based movie, the revolvers that the pilots are given are Modèle 1892 revolvers. These would see use all the way up until the 1960s in the hands of French police, and on a more grim note, in the 2018 Strasbourg attack, a Modèle 1892 was the revolver used along with a knife. If you want to know more about that incident and aren't familiar with it somehow, if you were under a rock 4 years ago, then it's not easy to, or it's not hard to find information on, but I won't be getting that deep into that. It's a very well-built revolver. especially, you know, First World War era revolvers, some of them are a little shoddy and strange. The only really odd feature of this to me is the right side eject, of which really isn't that bad. You just got to consciously know that it's going out that side, and then you're going to be loading like so, rather than the more what we're all more used to, it coming out on this side and going in straight forward like that. Just got a gate here, and we will be looking at this function again and mentioning this, but this does have a clicking function when the gate is open. On this one, it is a little worn out, but if I'm careful with it, it will usually cycle. But I mean, I just touched this this front bar here and stopped it dead. So there's a couple of interesting features that we'll definitely be taking a look at when we go to the tabletop here in a moment. There's not an awful lot in the way of what you can easily take apart without tools, so we won't really be doing any of that. But to finish off history of this thing, they were replaced officially for the French military in 1935 with the advent of the models 1935A and S, namely, as well as the Mob D. So some automatic pistols were the death of this, as with revolvers in many countries. We actually took a look at a model 1935S, which I don't know if you can see it, but it's right down there. And we did that in a previous video, and as it is the gun that one of the guns that replaced this, I'll probably put a link to it in this video's description. But anyway, let's go ahead and go to the tabletop and take a look at a couple markings. Only really got a few markings that we're going to be taking a closer look at here. So we've got, you know, the Saint Etienne Arsenal stamp scrolled on here on the right side of the frame, and then on the barrel is where you're going to find your date. You got an S, and then on this one 1901 right at the tip of my finger. On the top strap is where you've got the model, MLE or Modèle 1892. And an interesting little feature on these, so to take it apart, to get into the guts and really get into deep cleaning it, you need to remove some of these screws, and then this plate comes off, or opens. I believe it's actually hinged, but you see there's a 2 stamped on the hammer here. From my understanding, most of the internals have a number assigned to them, and that is to help the armorer put it back together and know what is supposed to be installed first. So the hammer would be number 2, as seen here. Any of the others you're not going to actually see looking at the outside of the gun, as they're going to be on the internals. But so if you're wondering why there's a 2 stamped on your hammer, that is why. Got a nice feeling texture to the hammer. It's just all around a good feeling gun. Again, just for a closer look, and we'll be looking at this here again in just a moment, but for just general purpose cleaning of your spindle and your barrel, you just open up the gate and pop out your cylinder on the right side, of which we've said this many times, and we will say it again, is weird. So yeah, like I said, not an awful lot to take a look at for the tabletop segment of this time. There usually isn't with revolvers. I think the only real exception was the Gosser revolver. But anyway, let's go back out to the range and put a few more rounds to this thing. Loading this thing, you've actually got a couple of different options. So for one, as we've discussed, you've got the weird left-hand eject, of which was actually intended more for cavalry purposes, where you could eject it out the side while holding the reins and then load like so. You can also, and this function on this one is kind of worn out again, I believe I've already mentioned this, but you can do that shot, and it's there we go, it's starting to hitch. Some of the time it works, and a lot of times that would be how you would actually load it, and you would dump the cartridges by ejecting. It's kind of don't really have a lot of room there, so we're going to go ahead and do that shot. But like we said, this was this odd design was more for cavalry purposes than anything, but still works. And this thing, you'll notice, and again, we probably have already talked about this a bit, but it seems like the lockup is really sloppy, and I am pointed in a safe direction, so if I pull a stupid here and let the hammer go, we won't have an issue. But even when you cock the hammer, there's still some play, but when you pull the trigger, now lockup is very tight. So there we go. We're going to go ahead and do 3 single action, 3 double action, just like we did at the beginning. Only maybe 6-7 yards from the target, 15 feet or so. Again, for ejection, you're going to pull out the gate. And I do this thing where I kind of grab it like so. So, rock on, boom. That way you're not damaging the yoke when you give that a whack. And then you can just pop it back into place and lock it. Probably saw at the beginning of the video I had a little bit of trouble with that. But it's a good feeling gun, honestly, for something that's 121 years old. This thing shoots nice. I mean, I had 1 miss in the whole video, I think. So that's better than average, honestly. And yeah, it's just a cool piece, one that I'm glad to have in my collection. Got the Entente forces of World War I just about covered. So anyway, hope you all enjoyed the video. It's been Thomas with Great Northwest Weaponry, and we'll see you next time.